Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to The Good Tree, the place inspired by the verse in the Quran of a good word that is like a good tree, whose roots are firm and branches reach great heights. You are joined by your hosts, myself Fiza and Noor.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. This series is all about how we can perfect our morals in all of our relationships. In today's episode, we will be discussing our relationship with oneself.
We are delighted to be joined today with Shaykh Mirza Abbas. Shaykh spent 11 years in Hawza in Qom. Since returning to the UK, he has taken the position of resident Alim at Zahra Islamic Centre in Nottingham. He has a Master's in Theology from the University of Birmingham. He also is the Programme Leader for the BA in Islamic Studies at the Islamic College of Advanced Studies and is also the Internal Manager of Hawza Ilmiya, both in Northwest London. In addition to this, he is currently working on his doctorate on Mysticism from the University of Exeter. Shaykh Mirza, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Good Tree.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you very much for bringing me near the good tree.
Alhamdulillah, thank you, and it's our pleasure to have you. In an increasingly hectic world that we live in, the self is often neglected, but it seems more and more of the messaging we are receiving from mainstream media and discussions at work or within our own personal life is that we should slow down, reflect, and learn to listen to our inner wisdom. From an Islamic perspective, we believe Allah Azza wa Jal has created all humankind with this inner consciousness or intuition. We believe the one who is more aware of God, or otherwise known as God conscious, is more content with life's trials. And so with today's discussion, we would like to explore this in greater detail. Therefore, dear Shaykhna, to begin with, could you kindly explain what is our obligation towards ourselves?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعليه الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be in your presence. Yes, indeed, as you have mentioned that self is neglected, but it's an oxymoron where you see that everything is focused towards self, but the true self is neglected. You know, we live in the world of individualism. Everyone is focusing nowhere but towards oneself. Everything what matters is the self itself. But as in reality, we see the opposite, where that true self is neglected. When that happens, that's why we find that there are more avenues to quench this thirst of feeding the self. That's why there is no limit to it. When it comes to fashion, when it comes to pleasure, entertainment, food, I mean, you name it. And this happens when one is not reflecting upon that true self. One is not trying to feed or provide with the true fruit, what is required for that soul, for that nafs, for that self. As one is void of doing so, then one starts to quench this thirst with the self, which is more based on his material desires and what he wants, and he will or she will never be satisfied. So when it comes to Islam, definitely the Quran clearly points out to that protect yourself. Alaykum anfusakum, for you is your nafs. And you should protect your nafs and also your ahl, your family members, your family from the nar, from the hellfire. So it begins with oneself. It begins with one soul, to protect oneself. And then after that is the family members. So the rectification and protecting of oneself in the first place, which is once again the whole foundation of tazkiyah and tarbiyah, which is training and purification, is based on that protecting oneself. That's how it begins. And self is the most absolute and the most apparent reality to oneself, to an individual, to a human being, to an existence. Self is the most apparent reality, right? The first thing that he reflects on is that self. The first thing that he realizes is his self, whether in any age, whether that be a 3 days, 1 day baby, or you name it, right? And the last thing that he will let go is that self as well, right? Even when a person loses his senses, for example, in the case of a person becomes a senile, if a person becomes what do you have, Alzheimer, but still he has a sense of self even there as well.
Ahsan, thank you so much, Shaykh. I think something you pointed out, which is really important, is realizing the difference between this kind of me, egoistic acknowledgement of the self, and then this idea of there's something beneath that needs looking after. And you mentioned the word tarbiyah. So I know in a lot of our books, they refer to this looking after yourself as self-building. So can you explain to us a bit about what self-building is and why it's important?
Self-building, or tarbiyah, as you pointed out, to training, it's one of the, how shall I say, milestones, or is one of the key factor for realization of the self itself, the true self. One comes to the understanding of that true self through that training, through that purification, tazkiyah or tarbiyah. That is why we find man arafa nafsa, right? A person who recognizes oneself or one's soul, then he will be able to recognize his Lord. Arafa rabba, man arafa nafsa, faqad arafa rabba. And certainly he would recognize his Lord when he recognizes his soul. Now, first and foremost is the methodology of recognizing oneself. Right? How can one recognize oneself? How can one do that self-building? In this regard, we find that first and foremost, the foundation, recognizing oneself or tazkiyah, is the principle of ubudiyat, or is the principle of realization that insan, that human being, we are in need all the time. We are nothing but absolute faqr, absolute poverty is in us, right? The very symbolic reality of a human being when he comes to this world and he cries and he seeks and he asks, itself is an indication of his limitation. And the last hour or the last minute where he departs from this world, where he whispers, where he's whispering, is also indication that he is in need. So the beginning of man begins with need, which is a call of crying that he calls, and call translated as dua. And the very last minute of his life, when he leaves this world, is whispering, which is translated as najwa. So the life of a man is from dua to najwa. And in all this aspect, he is always in need. So the foundation of self-building, the foundation, see, I mean, it sounds like contradictory. You have that self, and at the same time, you're saying you're nothing, right? So you have that self-building, but at the same time, the foundation of it is that there is no self, right? So that foundation is realization of faqr wujudiyya insan, which means that he has to come to the understanding that he is faqir. Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara ila Allah, inna Allah ghaniyul hamid. O nas, O people, you are nothing but faqir towards Allah, vis-a-vis your Lord, and Allah is ghaniyul hamid, and he is the ghani, and he is the rich, he is the one who is ghani, but insan is faqir. Then when he realizes that he is nothing, then the reflection of everything is manifested in his heart or upon him. What do I mean by that? when he realizes that he is a true abd, that he is a true slave, that he has nothing of him, then whatever he has in him is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at that moment, or at that instant, or at that initiation, on that initiation begins that everything what he reflects is nothing but the divine. Abduhu and then Rasulu. You see, Rasul says, I'm the greatest faqir. The title that he loved was that he's faqir. Faqir towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when a man recognizes that he is nothing, man arafa nafsa, that his nafs is nothing, then he will say arafa rabba. Then only he will know that everything is Rabb. He is nothing, but everything is nothing but Rabb. Every power of inhaling and exhaling is because of his Rabb. This thought, this sound and whatever he's doing is all in all because of la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Then this leads that person, and he reaches to that ecstasy, that feeling of that complete annihilation in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although he's there, that self is there. What type of self is this? That he has entered into a realm where there is no quwwah, no power, but the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the ultimate. Where did this ultimate begin from? It really started from recognition of that faqr, that nothingness. Now on this nothingness, he starts to build up. What he starts to build up? He says that I want to have this, but this I, he puts it in the side, but he would say that I want to have this, but how I will want to have this? I want to have this by a Bismillah. I want to have this while sitting towards the Qibla, because that Abd who have reached to Qana Qabi Qawsain or Adna, he sat facing towards the Qibla. I want to have this at this hour, at this minute, in this fashion. So where lies me? I'm not there. What I'm doing exactly is what my master have done. What the one who have reached to that level of Qana Qabi Qawsain, to that nearness, that proximity, to that perfection, where even Allah says that وَمَا رَمَيْتُ إِذْ رَمَيْتُ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. O Prophet, when you shoot an arrow, you're not shooting the arrow, but it is Allah shooting the arrow. So he starts to suppress his I, his ego, and then in this I and ego, he puts in what the master have asked him to do.
That is so beautiful, Sheikh. Thank you so much.
Sheikhna, you were talking about the famous hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, who said that whoever knows himself knows Allah Azza wa Jal. I was just wondering, do you have any practical steps that we could apply into our lives that could help us on this journey?
Right. When we look at the different methodologies of the masters on this path of spiritual wayfaring or tarbiyat and tazkiyah, we find different approaches to this question that you're saying, right? For example, you would find books that are written on akhlaq, where people or the scholars or the spiritual masters have written and asked us to reflect upon them, to read them. Like, for example, they will look at the Fazail Akhlaqi and the Razail Akhlaqi, which means that the Fazail, the honorable qualities, the good qualities which are mentioned in the Quran, which are mentioned in the narrations of the Masumin alayhimus salam. And then the Rada'il, which means the evil qualities which are mentioned in there. So now, basically, we make ourselves aware of these qualities that are there. For example, jealousy, it's a bad quality. Ego is a bad quality. Cheating is a bad quality. Making fun of others is a bad quality. And all of these have ayat of the Quran, and there are verses of the Quran, and also there are riwayat, where we read and try to understand and try to not have these qualities in us. And on the other hand, we read, for example, truthfulness is a good quality, sabr is a good quality, generosity is a good quality, acquiring knowledge is a good quality. And we find many verses of the Quran, and also we find many narrations. We read them and then we try to apply them in our life, for example. Okay, that's one methodology that you may say, or that's one approach for the question that you have said, that how can we really come to the realization of the self and purification or tazkiyah. The second domain, or the second methodology that you may find, is like, for example, reflecting upon the different powers of the nafs, powers of the soul, quwahai nafsani, as they say. For example, man have a quwa ghazabiyya, which means that he has that sort of nafs where he gets really angry or agitated and upset. That's in him, right? And then he has, for example, shahwiyya, for example, that he has this lust and desire and in him. That's a human soul. He has that in him. Then there is, for example, aqliyya, which is the intellect. He has that intellectual power in him as well. Or like, for example, he has the strength of imagination. He has the power of imagination as well. So all of these perceptions, the different quwaha, strengths or powers of his nafs he has in him, now he has to balance them, these all, right? He has to balance his, for example, quwa ghazabiyya, where he becomes angry or upset with something which may bring about certain evil qualities in him. Then he should make his aql, his intellect, more powerful in order that he suppress this, for example, right? Maybe he has, for example, the power of imagination so much, having long hopes, just, thinking about the future, forgetting the present, for instance, not caring of others, for example, just for saving it for oneself, for instance. Then once again, you have the aqliyya, that intellectual power that Allah have provided him, should make use of that to suppress and to channelize or to balance. And all of these quwaha, all of these different strengths that he has in him, is something that is required of him as well. We cannot really eliminate them. It has its own place, and it is something that must be there, and we have it, when we reflect upon it. But the point is that to balance them all. Now, obviously, for them to balance as well, they say, for instance, one can reflect in terms of the human soul. For instance, his soul or his existence is made of 4 elements: the element of air, the element of water, the element of earth, the element of fire. So a human being, an insan, even in the chart of the chakras and all that you may have in other traditions as well in Hinduism, that you find, he is built up with these 4 elements that he has, which is the element of water, element of fire, element of air, and element of earth. Now, a perfect man is the one who have all of these 4 elements in good balance, in perfect balance. Now, in order for these elements to come to a balance, he has to acquire these elements, meaning what? He has to acquire those things which have these elements. Like, for example, water is symbolized as knowledge. Yeah? Water, when you have a dream that you're swimming or you're drinking water, this means that knowledge will increase to you. That's the interpretation of that dream. That's why, for example, you use this term that he's such a great, bahri amiq, for a scholar who is a deep ocean. You use that ocean. Why? Because of that water symbolizes knowledge. The arsh of Rahman is on water. Is symbolized. The arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on water. What do you mean by water? Actually, it sits on the knowledge. Everything that the control that he has is because of the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have. So we have that element of water in us. Now, for example, we have the element of water. So what is the symbolized element of water? Which is knowledge, for example. There are other stuff as well, but I'm just using the knowledge as such, right? So I have to increase knowledge so that the element of water increases in me, which also brings about, water means purification. So through knowledge is a purification as well. Then the element of fire. For example, fire is something that is nur, that is light, that is heat. But at the same time, fire burns. What else burns in terms of the social reality or quality is jealousy. Jealousy is something that burns us. So I have jealousy in me, which is fire, which is natural. Every person have these 4 elements. So every human being will be naturally jealous of other person. This is very natural to have it. But the point is that to balance this, right, to put the fire in me on a lower level, instead of this fire overpowering and making even the water heated up with the fire, right? The water should come and put off the fire. So the knowledge that Allah is the one who gives. So why should I be jealous of someone else, right? So the knowledge and the ma'rifat and the understanding of Allah, which is symbolized as water, should come and put off the fire of jealousy which I have in me by saying that Allah is the provider. Allah provided him, that honor or that whatever he has or she has. So I will ask Allah, let them have it as well. And it is Allah who have given. So therefore I will get. So it's the question of balancing these elements that we have. Air, hawa, which is hawa nafs, which is ego. Even the Quran also uses the term hawa as well, right? Which is air, for instance, right? So when a person have too much of air in a person, then obviously he has too much ego in him. He doesn't see anything, which once again requires the element of nur, which requires the element of fire, or requires the element of gravity and earth. Point out to that, oh insan, you're nothing, you're faqir. That is earth, that it really needs for cultivation. It needs water, it needs air, it needs, heat. All of these things are needed for the earth to really grow something. So my nafs should really point out to that. For example, that gravity should be there so that this air which I'm flying should come down. So that is another method, as a methodology in akhlaq to reflect upon. And even this goes much deeper. This goes much deeper in the sense that, for example, food and intake. And this is like a whole world in itself. What foods birds eat? What type of foods they eat? Okay, now I want to have a flight towards Allah. I want to fly towards Allah. So I should be eating bird food so that my nafs is light, right? So I should not eat meat. I should not eat heavy things which will not allow me to fly. This is all goes in terms of self-building. That's why, there is a discipline in eating and drinking. This is quite common all across board in Islam and also in other, religions that you may find, that how one should be disciplining oneself in terms of the intake of the food, right? And this is also reflected, once again, all of these things requires that you may reflect in your free time, perhaps, is that the type of food the people eat, and because of that food, how their soul becomes. That's why they say that for 40 days, do not eat meat continuously. You have to cut eating meat once in 40 days, right? And vice versa. You should eat at least meat once in 40 days. And if someone who does not eat meat once in 40 days, he must recite shahada. He should pronounce la ilaha illallah, right? To that extent, we have riwayah. Yeah. So therefore, food also have an effect on our soul and our nafs, right? To balance these elements that we have. Okay, that's the second way or the second methodology that we have. Then when we reflect in regards to the methodology with Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayhi, have talked about, and Agha Bahjat and other ulama, especially in the contemporary period, they talk about or they promote or they encourage the students to, is the question of muraqaba, muhasaba and musharata, which means that a person should be very vigilant, muraqab, must be vigilant and awakened, for example, for every actions that he's performing. And at the same time, he should be calculating, he should do muhasaba of the actions that he has provided. And then if there be any mistake in terms of his action that he has provided that day, then there is musharata, which means that he should put a condition that next day it will not be in this fashion. Now, how to apply this muraqaba, muhasaba and musharata in an example? And it's very difficult. It's like catching a fish with a hand, in a river, which is very difficult, right? Ulama and scholars, they have done it. Allama Tabatabai says that when my muraqabah is very strong during the day, then my dreams are clearer at night. Because dreams are a way of Allah teaching us. When Prophet was visited by his companions in the morning, the Prophet, after giving salams, would ask, what have you learned last night? Then they would say that, well, we didn't go to any school or we didn't do anything. Then the Prophet would say, humans sleep in order to learn. When this eye closes, the third eye opens.
Wow.
So dream is a form of teaching, is a form of learning, teaching and learning. That's why the first 6 months, the dreams of the Prophet were wahi. The wahi came in a form of dreams for the Prophet. Hazrat Ibrahim, Hazrat Yusuf, and we have seen that, right? So then he would say that, okay, a person who eats less at night, he will be able to have a better dream, For instance, in a narration that we find, where the stomach should be light, at night, so that in the morning he wakes up. Okay, so what I was mentioning was that Allama used to say that when my muraqabah is strong during the day, what is muraqabah? Every action that he is performing, he should have a reason for the performance of this action. I'm leaving the house. Yes, I'm leaving the house to drop my kids, but that thing should pass through one's mind that I am leaving the house, to drop my kids, and which is an act, divine act, which is a good act. That act is something that Allah counts. That me as a responsible father or a responsible mother, I'm performing this act. Right? Now, obviously, that first step is solved. However, when I leave the house to drop my children, during the journey as well, there are many things happening as well, right? So obviously, what those things are happening and why they are happening, it should be like a film. You know what I mean? We should really know that every action-wise, at least maybe to begin with, there could be a lump sum act, leaving the house to drop the kids, 1. Then after that, going to my university, 2. Then perhaps for my lunch. Then perhaps, then within this time zone or time period that things have happened, that muraqabah means watchfulness of our action should be applied. That every action what I'm doing, for what reason? Now, why we are doing it is when we look at the way we should perform them, perhaps may help. And that is, for example, which I was mentioning earlier, I'm having food, you're also having food. Imam Sadiq says that you should have a little bit of salt before food. Masoom says that you should say Bismillah before food. The Sunnah of Rasulullah says that when you have food in front of you, serve the food, the person who is sitting in front of you first, and then serve the person who is sitting next to you on the right, and then on the left, then you can have it, right? You should have food while facing towards the Qibla where you're sitting. So this activity of having food is an activity where you have constant watch on it. It has been for the Sunnah, it has been for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not that. Perhaps, and at the same time, if I cannot have that, for example, I went to the table, but my other sibling sat in front of me. Now, I'm not going to pull the ear of my brother or sister and move him. No, I want to sit towards the Qibla. No, this thought will go in my heart, in my mind that, okay, it's okay, but I know that Qibla is not that way. I know my niyat is there to sit there. I know that I'm giving my brother an opportunity to, or my sister an opportunity to sit towards the Qibla, right? So even I'm not achieving that, I'm getting a reward for it, for the niyat, and much more. More than that, that I'm giving that person opportunity. I'm being kind towards that. I'm not making him get up from where this person is sitting because my ego or I want to sit towards the Qibla, right? That's why they say that when a person is fasting, when you give a mustahab fast, when you give the food to that person, you should eat it. You'll get 2 rewards. One for pleasing that person. Also, you get the reward as well, right? So it's mustahab for the mustahab fast. So therefore, every action that a person is performing, he's watching over that action. She's watching over that action. Why? Why am I performing that action? What is the reason? And then in the evening, where we call it muhaseba, that a person calculates the whole day, what he has done, why he has done. And then maybe that person have missed something out, then he puts a condition which goes sharat, that he will perform his tomorrow action with the intention of nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these three elements, or these three helpers, would come and help this person to really reach to, to that goal, or to that purpose of purification. Now, obviously, in this, you may have seen that there's a requirement of knowledge and understanding. I should know what sunnah is. I should know how to act, how to behave. I should have the knowledge of that as well while I'm applying this. When I feel jealous of someone, I should know that how should I control it, and I should know that jealousy is bad. I should not be fooled by these thoughts that are coming, for example, right? So these are the different methodologies that you may find.
Ahsan, Shaykh, you've given us so much food for thought there. I mean, bit about the elements, I had never ever thought of it in that way. I know we're supposed to have things in balance, but we seem to just say that as a common saying that we're used to hearing, but we don't think about it in reality. What does it mean? And also the whole idea of almost being your own critic all day. It's like having a camera on yourself and observing yourself all day and being conscious. And it's really interesting that you're saying that this consciousness, just being aware of your intention and your action, can give you the reward even if you don't actually achieve what you set out to achieve. For example, sitting in the direction of the Qibla. Thank you so much, Shaykh.
I mean, even just as an example of food. I know that the beauty of Islam is that it provides us with a method of everything, from taking shower to using the bathroom to sleeping at night, and all of these things, if we start, applying them, things will start to change, and a person would start to see things, like as Allama says, the clarity is much more. I remember asking my teacher once in Qom that sometimes when you're dreaming, if you don't like the ending of a dream, you rewind it, right? You go back, so that you want a, good ending, right? You want to change few things, So it was quite fascinating to me. So I asked my ustad, how can you do that? Sometimes you can do it, sometimes you don't do it. You go back to the same dream that you were dreaming, you have that power to do so. You want to do that, you go back. So he said, if you can control yourself when you're awake, leave aside dreaming, right? You're saying when you're dreaming, you can control yourself, right? So he said, it is enough if you can control during the day. That's all he said. So that was enough for me to be embarrassed.
That's what we should be worrying about right now.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, what I want to ask right now is, I want to go a bit backwards. And these podcasts that we're doing, we're speaking about what the fiqh obligations are, because that's what we seem to all know very well. And then how do we elevate ourselves to an akhlaqi betterment of that relationship? And I really like that this podcast started with us speaking about how we can elevate ourselves to a better relationship with ourselves, which in turn will create a stronger relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I just want to ask, what are the fiqh obligations that we have towards ourselves? And I'll ask that first of all, and then we'll see. I've got another question, but I think I'll leave that for later on. So what do I, as an individual who is mukallaf, who is responsible in front of Allah, what is it that I am obliged to do in terms of looking after myself?
Right. For self-purification and also self-building and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most powerful reality, if you want to call, or the most powerful vehicle, medium by which we could create our relationship with Allah is taklif, basically, is our obligation, is our responsibility. And that's where, Allah starts to address us directly in the Quran when we for our youth, for our young boys when they finish completion of 14, and for girls, as they say, completion of 9, according to Maraje. So that's where Allah starts to address us in the Quran. Ya ayyuhan nas, or Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, people who have brought Iman, right? And this is the foundation of Tazkiyah, and Tarbiyah is also this, that what is halal, one should perform that, yeah? And what is haram, one must avoid that, right? That's the beginning of it. Leaving that which is haram and performing which is wajib. That's the first thing. And particularly, I mean, sometimes we undermine prayers, for example, unfortunately, right? And as we know that it's one of the greater sins, it's kabira if a person doesn't pray. The first branch of our furu is also that, is salat, right? So then we look into salat, which is wajib that we are supposed to perform. And now for the salat, for its performance, what ahkam is needed and what mustahabbat are there for salat. Like, for example, praying on time, for instance, right? Performance of wudu with the mustahabbat, for example. And the recitation of the du'as when one is performing that wudu, for example, right? Even if I don't know in Arabic to recite, but I could easily remember in English, Allah, illuminate my face. Allah, give me the book on my right. Don't give me on the left. Allah, have mercy on me. Allah, keep my feet steadfast on the sirat, for example. Very simple, right? These are the mustahabbat, which are quite important. Understanding our basic ahkam and performance of them in the right way. You know what I mean? When it comes to the physical, worldly affair, we are so precise and careful. Put on the mask, use the sanitizer. You can't see this virus is out there, but you have to do all of these things, right? Well, the same way, even this tiny bit of najasat on my body will not allow me to pray properly. There's something about the najasat, if that is on me, right? It will not help me to the reward of the prayer or to take me where the prayer is supposed to take me, right? When it comes to these physical things, okay, when physical things are so precise, when physical things have so much effect, then on the spiritual level, on those things which are subtle, it will be much more powerful. It will be much more precise, right? When physical things are this precise, on a spiritual level or metaphysical level, it will be much more precise. That's how it is. So therefore, we have to be very careful about our ahkam, our basic ahkam, and the performance of them in the right way, with the right intention, with, how shall I say, with a joy. That's why they say, approach your prayers with joy, with happiness. Even if it's okay, if you're tired, get rid of your tiredness, and then, you should go towards your prayer. Not overburdening oneself, not overburdening oneself as well is important. If you can't perform 11 rakat of your night prayer, just wake up at that before Fajr. That is enough. Just to have a date, just to have a sip of water at that hour is important. So ahkam, that's why we say that the tariqah in Shia Islam is the Sharia. In the other schools, for example, the Sufi schools that are there, they have different tariqah. A person might be Maliki, but he may be following a tariqah of an Imam who is Qadiriyah, and he himself is, Shafi'i. You see what I mean? But his tariqah is Qadiri. His tariqah is Naqshbandi. His tariqah is Qunawi. Something like that. They're different tariqah. Rumi, for instance, right? They have their own sort of set of tariqahs, paths, But for us, our tariqah is the Sharia itself, which comes from Ahl Bayt alayhimus salam. What more clarity do we really want in terms of making our Sharia as the tariqah which will make us reach that goal and that purpose?
Ahsan, thank you so much. I definitely think, definitely myself, and I'm sure many of those listening are guilty of taking the ahkam lightly. It's okay, this is okay this time, or I didn't mean it. But really, when we acknowledge just how important these rules that have been, in essence, put down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our betterment, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us we must follow them, then there must be a greater wisdom to that. So thank you so much for emphasizing on that for us.
And so following on from that one, I was going to ask, in secular society, there's a lot now talking about gratitude books and mindfulness. I was just wondering, for us, when we're doing our self-scrutinizing or auditing of our actions, how do we show kindness to ourselves? What's the best approach for us to do that?
That's a very interesting question, and it's a more of one of these new age questions, these days that we have, people kind of being how one should be kind towards oneself. In this path,
self-love, that's what they call it.
What was that?
I think they call it self-love.
Self-love, yes, self-love, yeah.
But I also just want to add a little point to that, because I've seen it within our own Muslim brothers and sisters. You might call them, or what we will say in colloquial language, they're being quite hard on themselves. Like, if they haven't done the dhikr properly, if they haven't done their prayers, if they haven't done, mustahab acts, they feel somehow that they're putting all this pressure on themselves, and they feel like, like you were saying earlier, dropping your child off to school is not taking anything away from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but somehow we're thinking that it is, and it doesn't feel like, if I'm not sitting on a prayer mat or I don't have a tasbih, I'm somehow not having that connection with Allah Azza wa Jal.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Unfortunately, that's not the right approach, right? Fulfilling of our obligations and duties and responsibilities towards the family, towards others, is the best vehicle by which a person could reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Taking care of others. Allama Tabatabai says that I am happy to give away whatever I have done in my life in regards to my teaching and learning to a nurse for one night's service to the patient, right? So this really shows that how important it is to take care of others, and particularly those who are closer to us, the family members. And I first want to attend to that question of self-love, and then I will also point out to this very important thing that you have mentioned, that sometimes we think that just being on the prayer mat, fasting, zikr, attending majalis of Imam Hussein, doing ziyarat, and if you don't do this, it's like we sometimes you get into this, checkbox mentality. It's a Shab Qadr, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. It's like, okay, now I feel happy that I have done, right? So first, in regards to self-love, right? Once again, this is a bit of a new kind of age thing, and that kind of surfacing up these days, that one have to be careful about, because this may become a door towards one's egos, towards one's desires, towards one, yes, you reward, as they say, rewarding oneself. Yeah, you reward oneself after doing something good. But once again, this reward should be something that will once again improve our journey towards God. You know what I mean? One have to be very kind, very careful, very calculative, well planned when it comes to tarbiyat, when it comes to training oneself, right? One should not overburden oneself, right? Overload oneself and overdo things. That is also very important. But one have to start somewhere. One have to look at what is the capability and capacity of oneself to carry out these things. Yes, it's mustahab to recite 5 sabbahat at night. Perhaps I start with just 1, and then I built it up, to 5. After 5 years or 6 years, it doesn't matter. But eventually I will build it up. The point is that, right? So sometimes I have to give away some of those things which are mustahab to carry out some of the basic worldly tasks, such as you said, you have to drop everything and and take care of your family or something. You know what I mean? You have to take care of your friend. You have to attend even a wedding, for instance, to make them happy. These are the things that we have to consider. One should reward oneself. One should be kind towards oneself in this fashion. Not that one completely go on a holiday, meaning that don't do anything. I want to reward myself. So today, no salats, no nothing. I just want to be, because I did really good for the whole past week. So it's a weekend now. No, the wajibat should be considered. Wajibat must not be ever left, because that's the lifeline basically of our soul. Then in other things, yes, we may, but replacing that with something that is other, which is mustahab. For example, okay, I don't want to perform this for tonight as an act, but I would spend this minutes or this time with my family or with a friend, or maybe reading. Okay, I'll read. And entertainment is important as well. One have to engage, give time, because nafs, that's how his nafs is. Imam Sajjad in Munajat Shakeen, he's doing shikwa, ilahi ashku ilayka nafsi. He complains of his nafs. He complains of his nafs that it likes entertainment. It is natural that we like entertainment, but we have to be watchful over what entertainment. We have to be watchful over, we should not be carried away with this entertainment that I'm engaging in. My nafs like good food. I should not be, carried away by the good food that I'm having, that I don't calculate whether it is halal or not, for example, right? So all of these things I like, and I should allow my soul and my nafs to enjoy them. It has the right to do so, right? I should do that. I enjoy maybe wearing something, very good clothes, for example, right? Yeah, I should engage in that. I should purchase that. I should buy that, keeping in mind of it being halal, for example. These things needs to be considered, right? So I think that's it. That's the other thing is, which I mentioned, that sometimes we have the checkbox mentality. That we needs to be very careful as well. When I'm trying to eliminate myself, when I'm doing this checkbox mentality, once again, I'm considering myself here. I want to do this many number of prayers. I want to this, it's once again me and me performing it. I want to go cling onto the zari of the masoom. So no matter what I do, I want to cling onto the zari. I will not consider others there. So I want to feel that closeness. So when I'm doing that, I must consider others in that, for sure, right? It should not be a checkbox thing. Maybe my children, for example, is not allowing me to have that focus on a Shab Qadr, on the night of Qadr, perhaps, right? One should not change one's behavior, towards the children or towards others who is not allowing. I should be, there's a test, for me, right? So keeping the wajibat, right? And at the same time, keeping others in mind while considering them as God's creation. Keeping others in mind, keeping others first while considering that they are, for the sake of Allah. That's what Isar is. That's what sacrifice is. But this sacrifice should be something that is personal, meaning that maybe you have other people are dependent on you, right? You're not giving them their share, and you're giving it to others, for example. What is your share, you're giving it away, that is okay. And one should have that capability to do so as well, not others. Like for I, as a father, I should give my share, not my children's share, or not my family's share in that sense. Like the Prophet, when he used to enter his house, he would divide his time into 3 folds. One he will give for ibadat, one he would give for family, one he would give for cleaning, and one for himself. Four levels he would divide. And the 4, which was for himself, he said, I give this to my family. He gives his time as well. So personal things which belong to me, in that I have the right, if I have that strength and capability and it will not affect me, then I could do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheikh. I just want to ask about, we mentioned this idea of self-love, but I know that in Islam that we have a duty to look after ourselves in terms of looking after our body. So I want
Yeah.
to ask a bit in this sense. What are our duties towards our body, for example? I know you mentioned looking after what we eat, but can you just elaborate a bit more on what my responsibility is there?
Yes. I mean, our body has its own right, and we have to take care of it as something that is wajib. Even when we look at the Sharia, the ahkam, we find the same thing. Even many acts of ibadat is, how shall I say, given a concession, given a leeway for not performing because of one's health, right? So when we look at, practically speaking, when we look at certain rulings are watered down, certain rulings are bypassed, certain rulings are given a respite, this means that the body have some right over oneself. Like, for example, if you cannot do tawaf between, Maqam Ibrahim and Kaaba because of fear, because of whatever, okay, you can do it on wheelchair, you can do it further away, you can, all of these things indicate that there is some value to the body. Anything that harms your body, anything that is zarar, as they say, harmful to your body, you're not supposed to perform that act. Fasting applies as well, fasting, which is wajib. However, there's a compensation, there's another act that you carry out in regards to that. So when it comes to that, especially for our youth, for our young people, they should and they must be very careful of their health, eating healthy food, of exercise, of going to the gym, taking care of oneself. All of these things comes under obligation and are necessary for a healthy soul as well. I remember, and it is natural. I remember when we were in the Hawza, we used to have subgah, they say, the morning exercises. We used to go for Fajr, and after that we used to have some sort of PE class in the morning. And that had so much of effect on our capability to understand and to do more. After a while, we realized that initially we used to be so upset. What is this? This is Hawza, and you're not supposed to get into exercise and this and that and the other. But later on, once we started doing it, and then after a while, holidays happens, or sometimes if we are on a trip or the teacher is absent, then we feel it that I'm not having the same pleasure and joy in my lessons. So it's quite important to be physically fit and to pay attention to our intake, our food. Apart from that spiritual aspect that we talked about, the food of bird or whatever that we mentioned that earlier, apart from that as well, eating less at night, not having food that will affect our cholesterol, our body, these things are overwhelmingly emphasized by Ahl Bayt, by the Masumin alayhi salam. If they say that when Prophet came, the doctors had to close their shops in Medina. They say, why? Who came? They say the Prophet came, and he's prescribing things in terms of food, which is allowing them to stay healthy. So it's quite important in terms of healthy eating, taking care of oneself, of one's physical health, exercising, going to the gym regularly, for example, going for walks. All of these things are quite important.
I mean, when you were speaking now, it also made me think that this is also really important for our mental well-being. And I think, am I right in saying that looking after your body and looking after your, maybe let's say, stress levels or whatever it is that's going to build up and cause you to have any problems with your mental health, these all in turn affect you growing as an individual and becoming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yes, definitely it has an effect. And it's unfortunate that our community doesn't pay much attention to these issues. Mental health, exercise. It's quite important that we have an awareness of these things,
Absolutely.
And it also, I mean, that could be another program that you may look into, which will benefit our community, is, how mental health, you have an elderly person in the house, and this person is going through sundowning, which is like a syndrome in Alzheimer, for instance. You don't treat that person properly, right? You think that the person is forgetting and is trying to tease you or bother you, and you get agitated, you get upset. Basically, it's because of lack of awareness that the possibility is there that a person is going through that right now that I'm unaware of, right? And I am overreacting it towards that person, that person who is ill. So it's quite important to make ourselves aware of this, because this affects our nafs and our behavior.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Sheikhna. Thank you for highlighting mental health issues, but definitely dementia and Alzheimer's is something gets overlooked within our communities. And unless you have elderly relatives that are going through it or have been through it, you won't necessarily have the full understanding of what and how it impacts our elderly relatives and those that look after them. So thank you. Unfortunately, we are coming towards the end of today's episode. So just wanted to ask you just a couple of things that you could leave us with in terms of practical tips that we could do, easy things for the layman.
Yes, I think, as Allama emphasized when Ayatollah Ibrahim Amini went to Allama Tabatabai when he was in hospital, and he died after, few days right after that, because Allama was in his last final days, in that state. And he said, muraqaba, muraqaba, muraqaba 3 times, when they asked him, which we emphasized on that. So I think if we try to bring that into our life, at least know it is there, and sometimes do it, sometimes don't, and eventually try to conquer it and do it, that will really help us. And at the same time, increasing our knowledge and understanding, as we have opportunities right now through different means and different ways. We have Hawza, pre-Hawza lectures, the one which you're trying here to. These are all means by which we are increasing our knowledge level, right? And it's quite important to do so. And while doing all of that, at the same time, giving time to oneself. One last comment, I will mention this from Ayatollah Saadat Parvar, who was one of the students of Allama Tabatabai. Allama used to tell him that give 1 hour to yourself, right? Give 1 hour to yourself during the day. And later on, Saadat Parvar, he said, because I gave 1 hour to myself when my teacher used to tell me, now all hours belongs to Allah. Because of that 1 hour that he gave it to. So just reflecting on one's action, why am I behaving this way? Am I becoming jealous? Am I calculating oneself? And when I have a question, when I fall short, maybe connecting to someone who is senior, who is older, who have more experience, maybe a teacher, to ask that, is it really that, or is it, am I really too sensitive, or is it really wrong? I should do it, I should not do it. So I think giving time to oneself as well after all of this activity that we have, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Sheikh. I mean, you've approached this topic with so much kindness, and I really feel like you've reflected how much hope there is. I know sometimes when we talk about these things, it can become overwhelming, and we can feel like, oh, I'll never ever be able to reach that stage, so why should I even begin? Why should I even try? But you're emphasizing on, do the little that you can. And I really liked it when you said, maybe in 5 years, 6 years, sometimes improving yourself takes time. You can't expect it to happen overnight. Thank you so much, Shaykh Mirza. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of today's episode, but we'd like to thank you so much for making time to discuss this really important topic with us. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Inshallah, may Allah accept all your efforts, and may you all be in special prayers of Imam Al-Asr alayhi salam, inshallah.
Oh, Ilahi, Ameen.
Thank you so much. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Feel free to leave us a comment on our social media handles. And to find out more, please visit our website, thegoodtree.faith.
Till next week, fi amanillah.
Join us next week where we discuss our relationship with our children with Alima Rabia Batul Najafi.